This is the Fashioning My Faith podcast for women by women. I'm Erica Cantrell, and today we're going to talk about my spiritual 5-year plan. And so it's a bit of an odd title, but when we're in school, I grew up in the public school system. I don't know if you ever had to do this, but they would have us do these 5-year plans. And so in 8th grade, it was a 5-year plan to plan out high school, where we would want to go to college. In high school, it was a plan of what we're going to do in college and then in our career field. And so we focus and we focus and we focus on planning all these details to our life. But why don't we do that spiritually? Why don't we plan out, set goals, even not even just a plan, but spiritual goals? Why do we not do that in the church? It's the most important part of our lives, and we completely overlook it and just focus on these career paths and these who you want to marry, how many kids you want to have, and those things are important. I'm not saying it's not important to plan out your life, but it's most important to plan out your soul with respect to God's timing and God's will. But humor me for this episode. Humor me to discuss along these lines. And so let's look at a few examples, a few biblical examples of women with a plan, so to speak. Women with a plan. And keep in mind throughout this that our number one priority is goals as a Christian, not goals in the world. But these are women in the Bible who had a plan. The first two had a plan without God, and the second two had a plan with God. And I want you to look at the outcomes of this in your mind as we discuss this. And so first we're going to talk about Sapphira. She followed her husband. Her plan was with her husband, not with God. And so look with me at Acts chapter 5. Acts chapter 5, verse 7 through 10. It says, "After an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. And Peter said to her, 'Tell me whether you sold the land for so much.' And she said, 'Yes, for so much.' But Peter said to her, 'How is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out.' Immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last. When the young men came in, they found her dead, and they carried her out and buried her beside her husband." She stuck to a lie with her husband. So her husband had been called in first. They sold this land, and they acted like they gave all the money from it, but they kept some. So it's not even the premise that they didn't give all that they had, it's the premise that they lied about it. And so her husband had already been called in separately. He'd already lied. He'd already been struck dead. So they call her in. She doesn't know he has died. She sticks to a lie with her husband. This lie that they have conceived, she sticks to the lie rather than turning to God, turning to the church, and just being honest. And so she made this plan with a man, with her husband, without God. Let's look at Sarah with Hagar. We're told how Sarah was not able to have children for a while. And let's see what her plan was without God. Look with me at Genesis chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. It says, "Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said to Abram, 'Behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her.' And Abram listened to the voice of Sarah. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress." And so she conceives this plan. She's like, if God's not going to give me a child, then I'll get a child my own way. Why on earth? I don't know. But it's the principle that she made this plan to get something she wanted without God. She's going to go outside of what the Lord would do for her to accomplish her own goal. And so she's taking things in her own hands, and the result of this is Ishmael, the child that Hagar would have, and Isaac, the child that God would grant Sarah later on down the road, end up at odds. And it goes through generations. My dad believes that it goes on to this day, that that's why there's so much conflict in this world, worldwide, because these children of two sons of Abraham are going to constantly be in a battle because of the choice she made to go outside of God's plan. Keep thinking on those things as we look at our two next examples of women who planned with God. And so look with me at 1 Samuel as we talk about Hannah, who made the bold choice of 100% trusting God with the choice of a child. 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 11 first, it says, "And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head." And so she's vowing that, like, "Oh Lord, please, if you will just give me this son, I will give him back to you. It won't be her son, it'll be God's, not God's son as in Jesus, but it will be a child of God." So how amazing to be able to do that. How amazing that if you naturally can't have children, we've talked about this in previous episodes, for her to go to God, but not only to go to God, but to say, "God, if you'll just give me one, I will give him back to you." Because we could be selfish. We could say, "God, if you'll just give me a child," and end there. End of story. But no, she goes further. She says, "If you'll just give me this child, I'll give him back to you." So let's look at the same chapter, 1 Samuel 1, but look at verses 26 through 28. It says, "And she said, O my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I'm the woman who is standing here in your presence, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there." And so, in the in between verses, she conceives a son, she bears a son, his name is Samuel, and she weans him, she stops nursing him, and she sacrifices to the Lord an animal sacrifice, and then gives her son to him. And so, following through on the promises of our plan with God. If we're going to vow something to God, we need to follow through. But God carried her through. She prayed for a child, and God gave her a child. So think about the outcomes again. In our last example, we're going to talk about Jochebed. Jochebed is the mother of Moses. And so look with me at Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 3 says, "Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman." This would be Jochebed. "The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank." And so she's trusting God. There was an order out from Pharaoh to kill all the Hebrew children, and she trusted God. She had a child, a Hebrew male child, who was ordered by Pharaoh to be killed. And rather than killing him, rather than following through with the plan of a man, she follows through with what God would have wanted, what God would have planned. She hid this child. And when she couldn't do it any longer, she sent him down the river, only to be welcomed into the hands of royalty and accepted by Pharaoh's daughter. And so, how amazing that when she trusted God, when she followed through with what God wanted and not what Pharaoh ordered, look at all the greatness in the Bible of what Moses did, the ability that he was able to accomplish for God because his mom trusted God's plan. And so now that I've been reiterating, think about the outcomes, let's compare them. I mean, you have outcomes of death, outcomes of battle, and then you have outcomes of a child, outcomes of biblical, for lack of a better term, fame. You know, it's not that Jochebed did that for fame, but Moses is one of the most well-known characters of the Bible. And this comes from planning with God versus planning without God. And so, yes, these are plans for earthly things, but they include or not include God. So think about that. And let's talk quickly about setting spiritual goals. I'm going to share with you a few examples and how they can be related to the goals we make for ourselves in the worldly, secular world. But we need to ask ourselves first, where will I be in 5 years? not in a hospital as a nurse, not in a school system teaching, not necessarily married with kids. Think about spiritually, where do you want to be in 5 years? So here's some examples, and then I'm going to relate them to what would look like a worldly goal. So think about 5 years down the road, maybe you want to be teaching a Bible class. Whether it's super specific, I want to teach pre-K, I want to teach cradle roll, I want to teach middle school girls, I want to teach a women's class. Um, Relate that to a career goal. No, we might not make a career out of teaching at church, but a man might. But as women, rather than focusing on the careers of the world, focus on the careers within the church. Ways that we can have a spiritual occupation. Think about, instead of wishing for 5 years down the road to be married, how about 5 years down the road? Lord, I hope that I am a Christian, biblically submissive wife. A biblically submissive wife also accomplishes the worldly goal of just being married. Spiritually, a submissive wife. Being a submissive wife includes being submissive to the church, being submissive to the eldership. As elders, not as them just being men, but as elders. Spiritual goals with a worldly thought. Like, if you want to go through and make those goals for where you want to be in 5 years, put a spiritual spin on it. Submissive wife. Further, even simply things that we may not speak that need to be goals. I want to be at church every Sunday morning, evening, and Wednesday night. Bare minimum. You know what kind of a goal that would be? Lifestyle. How do I want to live my life? Rather than hobbies or traditions you want to do throughout the week, your lifestyle should be church attendance, the bare minimum. And I don't say that rudely. I don't say that to diminish the value of it, but our bare minimum for Christ, our spiritual bare minimum, should be attending the worship services declared in the Bible that we are to fellowship, to not forsake the assembly. And so, lifestyle. Further, family Bible study every night. You know what goal that accomplishes? Children. If I'm going to make a goal for myself to have family Bible study every night, that includes marriage, that includes children. Spiritual goals can cover those 5-year plan goals that we make with worldliness in mind rather than spirituality in mind. And lastly, planning VBSs, vacation Bible schools, or planning ladies' days, planning those extra events at church, being involved, that accomplishes leadership and involvement. And so things that we want to be involved in, things we want to lead in. If you want to be president of the 4-H club, if you want to be national FFA president, whatever organization they gear you towards in school, well, spiritually, what are we going to be leading in? What are we going to be involved in? Am I going to be, I didn't write this down, but if you want to talk about leadership and involvement, plus marriage, group them together: a preacher's wife, an elder's wife, a deacon's wife. And when you're older, maybe it's a preacher's mom. Maybe you want to raise the type of children to be preachers. Those are spiritual goals. And maybe those are beyond 5 years, but they're still spiritual goals that at the end of the day, some goals may look differently. You may have goals that change, goals that you accomplish, so you set new ones. Your spiritual plan will forever be changing. So keep building on it. Keep remembering to make those goals. If you need to write down 5 things you want to accomplish for Christ, put it on your mirror, and when you accomplish it, check it off, write another one. Keep setting those goals. Keep putting God first. These are just as important, if not, I take that back. They aren't just as important. These goals are more important. Maybe you're watching this and you're not a baptized child of God yet. Make it your number one goal. Your number one goal should be obeying the gospel and being a child of God. These are the most important goals we could set in our life. They can involve the goals that used to be important to set, but our plan, our goals, our number one, and then our all should be around God, our spirituality, our Christianity. So to conclude, if God is with us, who can be against us? If God's with us, who can be against us? If we continually plan and plan and plan and make goals and make plans and put it on pretty paper and write it in calligraphy and whatever us as women love to do, make sure God's with it. Like that He is in it. He is it. We just talked about living for God. Plan for God. Don't plan without Him. Planning with Him is better than planning without Him. Why would you want to plan alone? This is my closing thought for this episode. I don't know how fast it's went, but our closing thought is, why would you want to plan alone? There is so much beauty in planning with Him, praying with Him, having the peace of mind that you won't be alone. And of course, one day you'll get married and you'll be planning with someone else, but you should both be planning with God. Don't let it be a one-on-one. Let it be God first. Let God hold our hand. One of my favorite church songs is Jesus Hold My Hand, because it actually used to be my sister's, and then I got older and I started paying closer attention to the words, and my heart, like, how there's some songs that you just feel like your heartstrings are just kind of pulled. That's one of them for me, because when we're singing it and we're talking about Jesus Hold My Hand, because it's so beautiful that we don't have to be alone. So why would we plan alone? Let God guide your steps and plan for Him, plan with Him. I hope that this inspires you. I had a question like this, spiritual goals, in a workbook I was doing. And it honestly made my day, because to stop me in my tracks and to tell me to make spiritual goals, I wrote them down like that. I was like, oh, it's just flowing. It's just flowing. Because it's exciting. It's exciting to remember that we're not alone, to remember that we live for a higher purpose and a higher calling. And I hope that this helps you in that way, to bring a little joy to your day, to give you a little something extra to think about. And I just want to say thank you for being here. So I hope you have a good day.